Hey everyone, another episode is live. Today we have a true special guest, Mr. Nicola, good friend of mine. Nicola, welcome.
Thank you very much, Philip. Good to see you, man.
Nice, it's been a minute. Tell me where you're calling from today.
So today I'm actually giving you a ring from Belgrade, Serbia, which is in Eastern Europe, if the callers are not familiar with it, although we do have quite a few people from Serbia nowadays in the marketing world. So that's always good to know.
That's true, that's true. Tell me, how would you introduce yourself?
That's a good one. Yeah, so English teacher turned marketer turned accent coach and so on and so forth. Yeah, I'm happy to tell you a little bit about myself. So essentially, I started out around 10 years ago as a regular English teacher, as I like to say. One thing led to another. I ended up, going, more and more specialized from just regular teaching, English, to kids, to young learners, and so on, to business English. Then I discovered that there was a huge, huge demand for accents and accent correction, which led me to go towards accent reduction classes and accent coaching and dialect coaching. And then essentially to learn how to market myself and my business, I ended up falling into the deepest pits of marketing world and direct response. So it's a very interesting and fine blend.
It sounds very interesting. Tell me, like, how did it all start in the first place?
Yeah. So like I said, it kind of the trigger point I would say was in 2020 when COVID just started. Up until that point, I was just a regular employee working for an English, teaching company. It was one of the biggest companies in the world, actually. It was called iTutor Group, based out of China, based out of Shanghai. And times were good. The money was good. Everything was good. And then literally when COVID started, they just, the company went bankrupt. And they basically fired all the teachers, which put me in a very, very uncomfortable position of having a newborn and a 2-year-old and being out of work and a global pandemic starting and all that happening in basically a span of 1 week. So it was quite a turbulent time. Um, at the time, I saw no way out, and I decided that there was only one way out of that situation. That was to literally invest everything that I had, all the money that I had into marketing program. So then I kind of started picking things up, about copywriting, about design, about this, about that, and investing into further certifications and specializations to get into accent coaching. It was actually something that I came across completely without even knowing that that was a thing. And the way that I found out about it was through an article that I found from 2007 that talked about how expats moving into the US are facing a glass ceiling. They couldn't progress in their career. They were being basically prejudiced against when when other people would hear that they are, too Indian or too Hispanic sounding and so on. And then regardless of how good of professionals they just were not given equal opportunity and equal chance. And so that was an article from 2007 from New York Times. And then when I stumbled upon that, I was like, hold on, this is actually a thing. People like this exists. And then I started digging and I found an American what's it called? It's ASHA, so American Speech and Hearing Association, and that they were offering a certification program that helped English teachers kind of morph into something between speech language pathologists and just regular teachers, which is what an accent and dialect coach is. And it's been a fun ride for these last 5 years of me doing just that. But yeah, I've been teaching for a long time. This is my 11th year, so I've had quite a few calls and quite a few students, one-on-one and group ones.
Nice. And tell me in the first place, like, what actually creates an accent? What would you say?
That's a good one. So an accent is effectively a set of learned movements that we pick up when we're babies. So let me give you a very specific and concrete example. So when we're born, We know exactly 0 words, right? And we are learning about the world around us, right? So we know nothing again, and things happen to us as babies, right? We fall down, and then your mom says, "Whoops, the baby fell," and you're like, "Ah, baby fell," and then you start to connect ideas with words. And a lot of people think that babies pick up on words and grammar because we definitely know that our parents don't sit us in front of, like, they don't sit us in front of them and, with a grammar book and say, okay, Philip, this is, this is this and this is that and these are your tenses and this is passive. They don't do that. They just talk to us. And so as babies, we pick up on a lot of these things. So we have vocab, grammar, connection, rhythm, intonation, tonality, body language, even. And we pick it up, and it's very unconscious. It's automatic. This is why babies are so great at picking accents up. And then we typically do that for a number of years until we start learning our second language, whatever second language that might be. For a lot of people, it's English. For some people, it's Spanish, and so on. And then this is a universal experience for all of my students. When they started learning English, their teachers primarily focused on vocab and grammar, and they did not address any of these other things that we talked about, for the first language. So our brains being very efficient, what they do is they copy paste. So if your first language was, I don't know, Spanish, you have all these things that you picked up while you were learning Spanish or acquiring Spanish, I should say. And you started learning English, and then your teachers make it sound like vocab and grammar are the only two important things in life. Like if you don't learn English grammar, you're going to be cleaning the streets for the rest of your life. That's how they make it sound. And of course, we know that's not true. But usually there is very little to no focus on phonetics, intonation, rhythm, connection, and so on. And so what our brain does is it just copy pastes. So what we end up having is this is Spanish, right? And then this is English vocab and grammar, but with copy pasted Spanish rhythm connection intonation. So you have this mismatch. And this is why when you take a large enough of a sample size, let's say of people from, I don't know, Brazil, for example, or Germany, and you start listening to 1,000 of them, chances are they're going to sound alike. So this is why when you hear Italians, you're like, Italian. And the same thing goes for, for Germans and for, French and so on. So it's their intonation that reveals them. And so what accent really is a mismatch of movements, of facial movements that turns into a muscle memory that becomes very automatic. You don't think about it. Uh, Again, I like to use this example. I like to ask my students, do you wake up every morning consciously and say, today I'm going to, to speak like a Spanish native speaker, or, today I'm going to, sound like I was born in India. It doesn't work like that, right? It would be hilarious if it did, yeah, but it's not a conscious decision. So you start speaking and then it comes out the way it comes out because you've been saying things a certain way for a number of years.
Mhm.
That same muscle memory that we have for speech, we also have it for walking, for swimming, for skiing. Like you don't actively think about it, you just do it, right? But when it comes to speaking, it's three things that we have that are kind of really, really important for how speech works. And this is your lower jaw, your lips, because that can move as well, and then your tongue. So these three things move, and we pick up on how to move it for our first language, and then we just never change it. So if you ever go to an accent coach or to a speech language pathologist, what they will do is they will give you corrections on what to say and how to say it, but they'll not do it in a sense that they will say, no, no, make it longer, or make it shorter, or do this or that. They'll tell you how to position your lips, your tongue, where to touch inside of your mouth with your tongue, and so on. It's a really, really fun and interesting process. It's a little bit repetitive, but it works so damn well because when you think about it, when you were a baby, of course you were repeating the same things over again, right? Again and again until it kind of stuck with you. So it's fairly interesting process of how accents are created. It's a bit of a long answer, but it really is how it works. And once people understand this, then they're like, oh, so that can be like retrained. And the answer is yes, because, and we know that to be true because Hollywood actors do it all the time, right? The only difference between Hollywood actors and regular people, right, is yeah, it's they have a little bit more time, right? They have a little bit more time on their hands, and they have, of course, they work with lines, they work with scripts. Most regular people try to change their accent in, for every single thing that they might say, whereas actors, they have a script and then they will learn how to say those specific sentences. And this is how I don't know, Meryl Streep, and all these famous actors, and Brad Pitt and Hugh Laurie and so on, they change their accents easily, from show to show. They just get an accent coach or a dialect coach and they learn how to get into it, and then they practice, and it's really repetitive, but it works. And again, contrary to the popular belief, it doesn't take years. It's more realistically done in a span of 3 to 6 months for most people. So it's quite a fast process.
Nice. And how important is the way we sound in business, especially as non-native speakers?
Yeah. So it is important in a sense that there is this unconscious bias that I talked about a little bit, a couple of minutes ago. So when you think about how people are wired, we are mentally either in a safe position or in a very unsafe position. And people are very tribal by nature. And so if we hear or if we identify something that doesn't sound really like, our tribe in a way, we see it as a potential threat. And so in business, this is really just amplified because especially for people who are who dabble with performance-based roles, right? So marketers, especially remote sales professionals, a lot of people who are involved in negotiations.
Mhm.
So if they sound too off, too far away from what their listener expects, they're automatically seen as less credible, which is a big problem. There is a study from University of Chicago and another study from Wharton University. So they are seen as less likely to get funded when we talk about investors and like CEOs and founders. They're, I think, 23% less likely to get funded just on the basis of, oh, you have an accent, which was fascinating. And this is a little bit ironic and unexpected in today's inclusion and diversity and equality era, right? There's a lot of programs for that, but still, there's this unconscious thing. So they hear that you are, a little bit off, and then they judge you for it automatically. About 11 years ago, when I was like last time I was an employee, um, and this is before I started teaching online when I worked for this company for broadband, right? They were selling fiber services for the UK. I worked as just a regular customer support. This is my entry level job, right? Beginning of my working career. Um, I would have to talk to Brits. And then the moment that they would hear my American accent, they would just, have an old lady and she would go, "Is this a scam?" And the only thing that I could think about was, lady, even if it was, I would not tell you, right? But she
Right.
just heard a different accent and then she would just, automatically, is this a scam? Like it's too far away from what I'm expecting. In Australia as well, this is a big issue. There are, believe it or not, like all Australian call centers when they hear an Indian accent or when they hear a foreign accent, they just go, no, 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 give me somebody who's an Aussie. And this
Really?
is, yeah, yeah, that's a big problem, especially in the US, I would say so. There is a level of unconscious bias. We all like to say that we're open-minded and we're all accepting and so on. But for example, when you work with certain marketers, you will see that they take certain Western sounding names. So you have, Muhammad becoming, I don't know, like Howard, just to sound like he's a native, which is it's kind of one of the ways to fight it because it's not fair. It's not cool, but it does exist, this bias. And so in business, especially in sales, it's critical.
And what are the top three mistakes, let's say Eastern Europeans make on English sales calls? What would you say?
Yeah, that's a good one. So one thing for sure is the intonation. So every language is different. It has different intonation. So for example, Spanish tends to be very flat. So the first syllable, your intonation will go up, and then you'll keep it flat for the entire duration of the sentence. Whereas English is not like that. And so in English is stress timed, and so what that means is you have a lots of ups and downs. So if you have a speaker who's very flat sounding, they're going to be perceived as very monotonous, very boring. So that's a big one. Also, direct translations from one language to the other, that's a bit of an issue. So there's always some expression, and then there was one I'm sure you're going to be familiar with that. There was a politician who was a non-native English speaker, and he was trying to literally verbatim translate from one language into the other, and it just sounded ridiculous. And so people will notice that, and then they will identify, oh, okay, this is an outsider, so we're gonna be a little bit more reserved. And so that and robotics, speech. That's it. So when you chop the whole sentence up, so if you speak like this, people are going to notice. And then some languages are more prone to doing this. So like Mandarin and Cantonese and Vietnamese. So we have nowadays a lot of professionals from, that area, and the intonation of their own language impacts how they speak English. So those would be, I think, top three. But I'm sure there's others, but those three I think are the biggest ones.
And how do we balance sounding natural with sounding, of course, professionally American, if you will?
Yeah. So one thing that we don't want to do is to sound fake, right? We don't want to fake an accent. What we want to do is we want to try to sound authentic. And the reason why I sound authentic is that you have to be authentic and empathetic and honest. When you think about sales calls, right? So the more scripted it is, although there should be a script hopefully somewhere in there, especially for beginners, but the more scripted it is, the less genuine it feels. So one sentence is enough to throw, the sales professional like off balance. So what you want to do is you want to create that sense of connection and empathy, and you don't want to sound too unnatural, so you want to go ahead and prepare probably before you get into the call. When we talk about balancing, sounding too, professional to with a foreign accent or with trying to imitate like the native accent. So you want to think about the intonation, the rhythm, the pauses, and sounding as authentic as you can.
Nice, nice. Let's say when we jump on Zoom calls, like
Mhm.
what we can we do any types of exercises to prepare? You sound better? What do you
Sure.
suggest?
Yeah, sure. Ideally, you want to do it before the Zoom call.
Or
So ideally, you want to do it before the Zoom call. So yeah, sure. There's this technique. It's called shadowing. So this is when you take a recording, and it could be a YouTube video, it could be a sound recording of a native speaker, typically. I always tell to my clients, find somebody that you really admire. Like, so there are people who admire, I don't know, Obama or Trump or whoever, Matthew McConaughey, So find somebody that you really admire, and then you take an excerpt of one of their speeches, right? And then you want to go ahead and repeat, right? So you just want to shadow, you want to try and imitate, be playful with it. And the more you get, into that, the more you can find a phrase that works really well for you. You can go ahead and repeat that to get ready. So, for example, if you know that during sales calls, you need to say the phrase of, what do you think about that? Right? How does that sound? Or what's, if money was of no, issue, what would your answer be, right? So you find that one phrase that you're going to say, like one way or the other, and then you try and go through it again and again and again until you can go ahead and get it right. Today, with certain AI tools that I try not to recommend too much, I think people still do a better job at that. But there is this AI tool, from 11 Labs. You can just type out a sentence and it's going to read it in a native-like accent, which is phenomenal. So what people can do is if they have repetitive sentences that they need to say, they can literally type it into 11labs dot I think com or io, something like that. It's the only 11 labs that you can find. And you can just hear it and repeat it again and again and again. And then after a certain number of reps, it's just gonna start to stick with you. And again, you want to do this on a long enough of a time frame. It's not going to go away overnight because most people who are non-native English speakers, they're going to be probably speaking in their own certain accent for at least, 20, 30 years. So it's unrealistic to expect that it's going to go away in a day. But yeah, given enough reps, it's a really solid exercise. So shadowing is what it's called.
Mm, good one, definitely. And how can we train our voice tone to sound more confident?
Yeah. So I think confidence stems from you not being surprised anymore with something. So if you've been on enough sales calls, you pretty much, have the feeling you've heard it all, right? And like every excuse on the planet, every lie, you've just heard it all. So when you get to that point that nothing is surprising to you anymore, you start to feel really calm. And your voice, when you're very calm, it's the tonality of it is very low, right? You have very low pitch and you make pauses and you're fine with making pauses. And then people, when they're nervous, what do? They start to rush. They start to not make pauses. They start to stumble over their words. They think that if they do not speak like, I don't know, Ben Shapiro, who's very fast at talking, they are under the impression that that's it, the world is going to end. So to sound more confident, you actually want to lower the tone of your voice. You want to slow down, make pauses, feel confident with it, right? And I guess the easiest way to do that, if people feel, uncomfortable doing it in front of other people in the beginning, you can always, fire up your camera, you take your phone and then just record yourself and then practice in front of the phone. It really does wonders.
And what is intonation control and how does it build trust and authority?
Yeah. So it's connected to what I just said. So effectively, um, when you're unsure and when you have questions, your intonation typically goes up, right? So, and then when you're just saying regular sentences, the intonation typically is lower and it goes down. And so there's a big difference when you say, I'm hungry and I'm hungry because the last one sounds like a question. And so if you are always consciously or unconsciously always ending every word, every sentence, every phrase with intonation going up, you leave an impression that you're always not confident, that you're always questioning, you're almost not believing what you're saying. So a good intonation control is you being, I'm not going to say hyper aware of what you're doing with your intonation, but knowing this is a regular sentence, right? As opposed to a question. So I need to go down. As opposed to this is a question, so I'm going to go up, right? So when you think about that long and hard, and when you have some practice, that's when you develop this control of intonation.
And how can we stop feeling insecure about having, stronger accent, if you will?
So that's a good one. So sometimes it's mindset, right? So the first thing that everybody I think needs to know is accent in itself is not an issue. It really isn't. In accent coaching, we have this term that we call intelligibility, which is um, phoneticians and speech language pathologists saying how easily understandable you are. And I'm going to give you a really easy example. So take two words that are kind of similar, they resemble each other, but they're not the same. We know they're not the same. For example, tax and relax,
Mhm.
right? So somebody who has a problem with intelligibility would say, for example, oh man, the tax season is coming, and then somebody else understands him or her to have said, oh man, the relax season is coming. That's an issue. So it's not a problem if you have an accent, but people understand 100% of what you're trying to say. So it's the lack of it's the lack of understanding that makes accent and feeling confident an issue. So the first step to be aware of is that, having an accent is not a deal breaker, not necessarily. Yes, there is going to be some bias. Yes, people are, maybe going to have their guard up, but it's not a complete deal breaker. So for some people, it's a matter of like national identity. They're very proud. I have some, Greek students who are very proud to be Greek, and again, good for them. But it's really hard for somebody who has a very strong sense of national identity and then they express it through their accent and speech to change it, as opposed to somebody who is just like, look, it's just a message that I want to, get across in a confident manner. Those people are really, really easy to work with. So yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned pauses earlier. Like, how can
Mhm.
we use pauses effectively, especially, in sales?
Yeah. So when it comes to pauses, pauses are really useful when we want to really, really emphasize something. Now, there is a right amount of pauses, and then there is too much and too many pauses. And I'm really glad that you asked this question because literally yesterday I was on a sales call where I was being pitched to yesterday. And that closer just used so many pauses to the point where I could not figure out what the next thing was going to be. So when you make strategic pauses to get people to understand what it is exactly that you're trying to say, and when you give them enough time to process what it is that you have just said, that's fine. So you want to be strategic about it. Give them time to think. However, you don't want to make pause between every single sentence. So, again, let me give you an example of exactly what happened yesterday. So, the guy was taking me through the process of how something worked, and then he said, "Well, we track numbers." And I said, "Okay, that's really good.
Go on.
Do you
Yeah.
have any questions about that?" I do not. Go on. I don't get it. Oh, you don't get why we track numbers? No, I get that. I just like I'm waiting for the for the thing to happen. Like get to the punchline, right? So if you pause too much, it really can have a completely backward effect and you're gonna lose people. But if you don't pause at all, people literally are not going to have enough time to process what it is that you just told them. So some people speak extremely fast to the point where people just, can't get them. So it's fine to use pauses. The world is not going to end if you stop for, 1, 2, 5 seconds. In your head is going to feel a lot longer, but it's fine to pause. You should pause if you want to be more effective.
And if someone wants to work on their accent, what's the first thing they should do? Should they buy some book, YouTube videos, find a mentor, or something else maybe?
Right. So there's a number of ways that you could do that. The so one of the things is you could always shadow. Like that's free. You can open, I don't know, any YouTube video, any TED Talk video, and you can just try and imitate. Now the problem is even, some people are really musical and they're very talented and they hear the nuance, and so it's very easy for them. And then some people are just not, and that's normal because not all of us are musicians, right? So some people just are not that, prone to that. They're not that talented for that. They don't have a knack for it. So shadowing is really good if you have a knack for it. Um, I think courses are fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with courses. Like one of the reasons why I'm personally against courses is that they're very generic. Most times they're very generic. They just say fix your accent. And so every speaker is going to have something different type of a problem, and it's really hard to include everything that can happen in a language because it's ever evolving. So AI apps are still not there yet. Some of them are kind of heading in a good direction. So now we have like Elsa Speak, we have Bold Voice, we have a couple of others. But in the group where I am with a lot of speech language pathologists, where everybody was freaking out, AI apps are coming, we're going to lose our jobs. And when we ended up testing them, they just didn't perform well. So
Mm.
in my personal experience, getting somebody who has experience, who's a coach, who actually is a dialect coach or vocal coach, depending on what your needs are, they're probably going to be your best bet to get the fastest results. That should not mean that, you never want to see any YouTube video, you don't want to try shadowing and so on. Maybe you do want to try it. But most of my students that come to me, it usually is the story of we tried 10 different things and it didn't work. And we really want to be serious about it. And so once somebody who's interested in doing that type of work, once they decide to go for it, the process is very easy. So there is like a 30-minute accent assessment where people just need to read. And then while the person is reading, the accent coach takes notes of this is how you said this particular sound, and this is what you said here, and this, and you didn't connect well, and your intonation was flat, or you just finished every single word going up. So they'll catch all these things and they'll jot them down on a piece of paper or in your notes app, and then the pacing is really simple as well. So English has 44 sounds. Nobody needs to fix all 44. Like that's we all know how to say ah, right? So most times it's between 8 and 12 sounds, and the pacing is typically one sound per lesson per week. So if people need to work on, let's say, 8 sounds, it typically means that they'll be working with an accent coach for 8 weeks, and that's it. And this is most people. So most people, in my experience, they finish everything that they need to finish within 90 days. This is 12 weeks, right? So 3 months time, they pretty much are done with it. And then they have all the required knowledge and all the practice sheets and sound files that they need to continue practicing and like maintaining it. But it really doesn't take that long. And when you consider the opportunity cost of, let's say, for a CEO who's maybe trying to get additional investors to invest in his or her company, the opportunity cost of I have an accident, I might lose a deal, and I have a slightly more neutral accent and I might get a lot of millions, for my company. It's great. And then comparing the two, it's really not a massive investment, comparatively speaking. So the ROI is typically like 50 to 100x. It's really, really, a something, and it doesn't take too much time. So it's really recommended for people who are self-conscious, who lack confidence, who want to work on it. It's not a necessity, but it's completely elective, But for people who do want to go for it, it's really good stuff.
And what advice would you give to someone, that's non-native English speaker that's, starting to work in English online?
Um, don't give up. No, but realistically, I think there's only one way to lose in the game of, online business and a game of freelancing. I work with a lot of freelancers, so that's why I'm telling you this. Um, the accent is not, like I said, in itself, it's not an issue. It doesn't have to be an issue. It is something that people will have a reaction to one way or the other. You can decide to worry about it a lot, or you can decide not to worry about it at all. But it is something that can be fixed. And, even if you have an accent, you definitely should go for it. And then once you start to get reps and once you start to get results, as a sales professional or as a founder or as a, whatever it is that the career path is that you've chosen, I think that you should definitely go for it. Not giving up, on it is important. And then for sure, when you're practicing your script or your pitch or your elevator pitch and so on. There are ways, with or without a coach to get it right and to still sound confident. So even if you like out of this entire conversation, even if you remember, slow down, make strategic pauses, um, be an active listener. So that is going to do a lot for you.
And did you have an aha moment when you realized your work really had a global impact?
It still, I have to say, feels a little bit surreal that what I do matters. It really does feel that way. But the aha moment for me was in it was 2023. I was with this client who I never heard, of his name before. And then he told me that he was starting, his own hedge fund and that he was targeting companies in a I forgot now, it's been a while, but targeting companies who were not in like ABC funding, but it's like pre-seed round and so on. It was something like that. And so he was trying to get together with, I think, over 100 individual investors to jumpstart his own, hedge fund. And I just Googled his name during the call, which is, and which was when I found the article that he was on the Forbes list. And he was He was a Ukrainian oligarch worth something like $700 million.
I bet.
And that was just beyond my wildest dreams. When that happened, I was like, wow, okay, I'm just an English teacher turned accent coach who is just, working from home and trying to help people sound better. And then there is this millionaire sitting in his whatever office in Cyprus. And that was kind of the wow, okay, holy crap, that really is happening.
That's definitely something. And what's your
Yeah.
favorite English accent besides US, of course, American?
Sorry, was that again?
What's your favorite English accent or any accent?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm gonna go with Scottish. So, I love I love how the Scottish accent sounds, and then I love imitating like groundskeeper Welle, so from The Simpsons. And when you see what's the name of the movie, like the train spotting, right? When you hear Ewan McGregor speak in Scottish, it's absolutely beautiful for me because the first time I watched the movie, I literally need subtitles. I was like, what in the world? What is this? So it's a really nice one.
I heard so many people, especially US prospects, say they really liked UK English accent. I find it very interesting. Maybe
Yeah, yeah,
it's, I don't know, exotic to them, but yeah, it's
for
really
sure. There's well, one common misconception is that when people say, the UK accent, and there is like 20 of them in the
yeah,
UK,
of course.
and the same thing, can be said for the US. So what I coach people to do is what we call general American or standardized American accent. This is what is spoken in the Midwest. So Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas. It's very neutral. It's how Warren Buffett speaks.
Mhm.
So it's very easy to understand. It's not like a typical New York accent, drink coffee, sound like a New York Italian gangster. No, and it's not a California bro, who's born and raised in Santa Monica. It's nothing like that. Or someone who's born and raised in Houston, Texas, right? So there's a wide variety of how you can sound, and so the Midwestern Nebraska, Iowa type thing is kind of the most neutral and what most people decide to go for, and that's what also kind of the equivalent of that in the US would be the RP, so received pronunciation, BBC English, Queen's English. They have different names.
Nice. And tell me, do your clients still have some kind of accent after they work with you, or how does it look like?
Sure. So it depends. So it depends on their commitment. So the commitment typically looks like this. You need to literally find 30 to 45 minutes a day to go through the practice, right? So you are given sound sheets and practice sheets, and what you want to do is just go through the reps, right? You're just listening to the audio files, you're shadowing the audio files, you have everything in PDFs. If you can do that for a week, for 30 to 45 minutes a day, guaranteed by the end of the week, you're going to have between 7 and 9,000 repetitions of your target sound. And I don't know about you, but if I did something, for 9,000 times in a different way, it would start to feel pretty normal to me. So
Definitely.
again, most people, they don't have, I don't know, hours and hours, without any stops, worth of time to do that. But I do remember having one of my youngest students, actually, he was from Egypt, and he was 16, and he and I worked for about 4.5 months. The guy disappeared completely, vanished from the face of the earth, and then came back about a year later. And his face has changed. He started, growing his mustache and beard and so on. He was now turning 18 and so on. And the guy picked up the call. He wanted some maintenance sessions, and I just didn't know what to expect. And when the guy showed up, when he started talking, he sounded 100% native, like a dude was born and raised in California. And my honest reaction was like, dude, what the hell? Like, what did you do? And the guy was like, 6 hours a day, man. 6 hours a day.
Hours a day. Oh, no.
That's a big commitment. And so if anyone has that amount of time, for sure it is absolutely doable. However, again, it's not the end goal. The end goal should be you're easy to understand. People don't misunderstand you. They stop asking, "What? Could you say that again? Could you repeat that? Sorry, I didn't really catch that."
Interesting.
When and if people hear that, that is typically a sign that you might want to consider accent coaching. So if people like cannot stop asking you, "Hey, could you say that again? Where did you say you were from?" That can be just very annoying for everyone involved. But yeah, so if you do get that a lot, that's your cue. And then if you don't, great. I mean, good for you. You can just continue, being an awesome superstar you are.
Tell me, you've been in business for some time right now. Uh, are there any books, podcasts, anything you would recommend?
Nothing specific. I mean, there's a bunch of YouTube channels and a bunch of podcasts today. What my personal favorites are, I love watching Diary of a CEO. Stephen Bartlett has just amazing accent. You just love listening to him. It's just so clear and easy to understand, even though it is British. Um, then another personal favorite of mine is The Minimalists, right? So this is Joshua Fields Milburn, I think, and Ryan, whatever his name is. Mark Manson has a really nice and clear accent. So the guy who wrote um, the subtle way, the subtle art of not giving a fuck, right? So he has wonderful accent, really, really clean. At the end of the day, you need to find something that you enjoy listening to. And then if you go ahead and just mimic and repeat and shadow, that already is going to be a massive, massive needle mover.
And tell us a little bit about your website. Who do you help and how can people find you?
Sure. So, for a lot of years, I was just present on these Upwork type platforms for English teachers. I'm making a big pivot from that, and I have built out my own website. So it is intonetic.com. So like intonation, but intonetic. On intonetic.com, you can see, what target audiences I serve. So it is pretty much anybody who is a tech employee. So this is your programmers, developers, to, executives. So this is C-level executives, CEOs, CTOs, and so on and so forth. Um, they typically, regardless of what their um, kind of history is and what their career, history has been, they all typically have the same or similar things to work on. So everybody needs to cover connection, rhythm, intonation. Everybody has a couple of sounds that they need to work on. So this is anywhere between, like I said, 8 and 12, but most of them finish everything within 3 months. So this is 12 weeks, 12 sounds. It really is very easy and straightforward. You just need to show up. And one big thing that I would say is kind of like a deal breaker, a clear sign that somebody is not a good fit for it. It's not a good fit for anybody who is, who's not fluent. So a lot of times I'll have people contact me and say, well, my English level, for example, is at, B1. Should I be working on my accent? No, no, not at that level. So you want to have a really, really good mastery of grammar. You want to be fluent. You want to be very well versed in idioms and phrasal verbs and so on. So like be able to communicate fluently. And then the accent tweaking is cherry on top, right? So it really should be something left for the very end. So this is kind of the only thing that I would say is important. A lot of lately, I've been working with a lot of closers because again, that accent bias and that preconceived notion that if somebody sounds, non-native, that automatically the quality of the offer or quality of the product is not good enough. That is going to really affect the close rate. For example, it's also going to affect, the way that, if somebody's going to be happy to do a, my favorite new word, to do a pithy, right? Instead of do an installment type plan. So it really is, it really does add up. So business professionals, whatever your story is, if your voice is what creates results, it is something that you could be thinking about down the line.
Definitely. Any last message for our listeners?
Um, yeah, just don't be afraid to voice, your thoughts and don't be afraid to speak, even if you have an accent, even if you're not a non-native English speaker. Confidence really sometimes shines through, and it does a lot more for your message, for what you're trying to get across. However, if you still feel a little bit overwhelmed, a little bit embarrassed, if you still are just unsure if your accent is a factor when people say, you know what, I have to think about it. You know what, I don't have, that kind of money. You know what, maybe, I just need to consult with my wife, anything like that. Or if they just keep asking you to repeat something, or they didn't really catch that, or they ask you, hey, where'd you say you were from? Yeah, you might want to go ahead and think about this. But otherwise, it absolutely should not stop you from, putting yourself out there.
Thank you, Nick, for your tips and your time. Everyone, that was NJ from Belgrade. Till next time, keep practicing. Take care. Bye bye.